This is the first slide. Seems like your main focus here is to contrast between explanatory feedback and corrective feedback alone. And this is a title of your presentation or topic. Since everyone knows what the title or topic is already, so this can be in a different place. So you might want to move it to the title slide. Just focus on this contrast on this slide. So you might want to do something like this. The heading's gone and I moved it to the introduction slide, opening slide, first slide and second slide. And also, it's visually a little hard to process, so text alignment should be more intuitive, meaning you might want to put explanatory feedback on the left side and corrective feedback on the right side, and this in between. So you could do something like this. And if you take the suggestion by your peer into consideration, the sign could be a little more exaggerated. In addition to all these changes, you could also think about color coding the text, because it's important to make it intuitive. The recognition of the surface meaning of the text or the screen content should be intuitive. It should be intuitive and instantaneous, so that your students can focus on the deeper understanding. You really don't want your students to spend a lot of effort recognizing the surface meaning of the text or superficial meaning of the content. That's like an extra step the learner have to go through before they can actually start thinking about the content itself. So just think about what you can do to make it more intuitive in terms of recognizing what the text means and what the surface meaning of this screen is. So this sign, larger sign, is good. And also, if you're making contrast, maybe you can use different font colors for the explanatory and the corrective. This will make it easier for your students to recognize the contrast. This is just one idea of color coding, so this is not the best way. There should be better ways which you need to think about. And also, I didn't talk about the text size. I thought the text size was decent, but it's always a good idea to challenge the upper limit of the font size. Okay, 72 didn't do it. And one thing I realized was the aspect ratio of the screen. It's a 3:4 ratio. Our lab has a widescreen monitor, so this is actually not the right size for the widescreen monitor. If you project this onto our screen, it won't perfectly fit. What will happen is you will get black spaces on both sides, on the right side and left side, which means you're not taking the full advantage of the screen. Okay, let me show you what's going to happen if you use the right aspect ratio for this screen. Oh, okay, page setup and widescreen. Now the font size is going to be relatively larger than before. It's still a 54, but when you project it onto a screen, it's going to stretch out and fill the whole screen. And relatively speaking, the font size is going to be larger, even if it's 54. Then alignment. And also, depending on how you're gonna present the content, think about animation as well. Maybe you are introducing the two different concepts first, explanatory feedback and corrective feedback first, then talk about the difference later. So you might want to show these two first without the larger than sign and show this afterwards. That's an idea as well. Or show the larger than sign first, then show these two later to emphasize your point that you are making a contrast between two ideas, two concepts. Okay, let's move on. You are giving a brief summary of the corrective feedback here. You're talking about three different things, and one suggestion I would make is I would put animation. I would show one at a time. Instead of showing all three from the beginning. In this case, it's okay for your students to bundle all three items together when they memorize them. But in many cases, you do not want your students to bundle different things together to avoid confusion and mix-up. If that's the case, not showing all three from the beginning is a good idea. Anyway, I still think it's much easier for your students to follow if you show one at a time. So use animations. That's one suggestion. And of course, it doesn't look like you're getting into actual examples in your presentation, but if you're going to talk about what they are, it's definitely a better idea to show a brief example, quick examples as well. When you say basic, what do you mean by basic? I think you have to explain it, and if you can show what you mean by basic by using some example, that's great. And correct or incorrect, same thing, and same thing here. Even if I kind of explained the basic idea about corrective feedback in a Smartboard lesson in class, I think it's a good idea to give them a refresher of the memory. So show some examples. Since I want you to show visual examples, you might want to use this as a quick intro. You might want to go through three concepts really fast here, but show actual examples next using some visuals. So you might want to add at least 3 more slides to show examples of basic. What you mean by basic? What you mean by correct or incorrect? What you mean by buzz sounds or checkmark images. That's an idea. And same thing here. Explanatory feedback. You have 3 aspects of explanatory feedback. So do the same thing. You're going to talk about what you mean by informative and what you mean by principle based, and finally what you mean by tells learning why. Especially first 2 need more explanations. Last one is kind of intuitive, but first 2 definitely your students need some more explanations, and when you do that, show some examples visually instead of just talking about them. This picture, remember I said the visuals, the slide, what you show, what you talk about, it should be intuitive. The surface recognition should be intuitive, and when you show this picture, learner has to think, how does this relate to what you're talking about, what you're showing? So your students will try to connect this to this, connect this to this, and connect to this, and try to figure out why it's there. What does it mean? And to me, it's not intuitive enough. Some will just ignore it, but some, like me, will try to figure out what you are trying to convey with this picture, and I failed, kind of. I kind of made connections between these 2. Tells learner why. Maybe she's explaining why part. And then, what about the other 2? If that's the case, this picture is only tied with the last part, maybe closely, and vaguely with these 2. And putting it here is not exactly a best way to go. So, logically, theoretically speaking, you want to put it here, but it kind of looks weird. Another thing is, when you use the image size is also important, and this is kind of small. If you want to show some important message through this picture, then make it larger. I would use larger size, and it should be large enough to be like this. Otherwise, it's gonna be just a decoration. For decorative purpose, you use smaller images like this, but why do we need decorations? And you want to communicate something through pictures. And the ultimately best way to show picture is to fill the whole screen with a picture like this. And you show this and convey the message through this picture. And if you want to convey other pieces of information, other messages, you need other things like this as well. But when you have 2 of these together like this, the message gets weaker. You convey multiple messages simultaneously, and if they are not sending at the same message, then it means you're sending at the mixed multiple messages at the same time. That's not a good idea. So if you're going to use images, as I said earlier, I will use images as examples afterwards. So just show 3 key terms here and quickly describe them and show the examples later. So add 3 more slides and show examples of informative and principle based, and tells learn why. And this is about the study. Showing research examples is a good idea, but just talking about the research study may not be, again, intuitive enough to understand and visualize how the research was conducted, what the research design was, and so on. Even if you have a text on screen, it's still not easy to visualize or conceptualize and create a mental model of what the research design was, what the research was for, and how it was carried out, and so on. If you could kind of show pictorial, graphical representations to make it easier to understand the whole thing, that would be great. So think about how you understand this research design, research results. When you think about this study, I know you are visualizing pictorial and graphic elements, and turning them into visual aid is one of the most intuitive things you can do when you create a visual aid. And same here. Embedded transfer test, you would probably explain what you mean by that, but show some visuals to make it easier to understand. When you talk about study, it's generally a good idea to show diagrams, pictures, and photos, and so on. Even when you read a research article, you often see diagrams or pictures like this when this is a design of the test that subjects have to go through. And just talking about the study design is usually doesn't really make a good sense. So here, if you're going to talk about the study design, arcade, and questions about electricity principles, then use a visual like this, and people understand what students had to go through and what the test was. And when you talk about results, same thing. But if you explain the design with visuals like this initially, the results could be just like this: higher scores on embedded transfer test, because they already know what embedded transfer test is visually, like this, and what direct guidance is through images. Right now, it's a little hard to visualize what they are. Even if you explain them verbally, thoroughly, still for some students, or for many students maybe, it could be a little confusing. So this is going to be a subtopic within your presentation, and using a transitional slide like this is a good idea. Okay, so you are explaining two different types of channels, verbal and pictorial. Okay, seems like there are three assumptions. So you might want to say three assumptions first. There are three assumptions. Then move on to first, second, and third. So use the same approach as I explained here. Introduce three concepts first, then getting into each afterwards. So you might want to introduce three assumptions. Three assumptions first. So you might want to have a slide like this. So you are simply introducing three different terms first initially, then you're getting into each afterwards like this. Since you color-coded three different assumptions, I also color-coded the three key terms here as well. And of course, you might want to show one at a time, 1, 2, and 3, one by one, by using animation. For this might be enough. And limited amount, single channel. As your peer said, we need explaining. But when you do, this picture is not going to help explaining these two concepts. So this is a decorative purpose. You can't use this picture to explain single channel. You can't use this picture to explain limited amount. You can only kind of symbolize that this is about human cognition. So this is not going to help. When you talk about capacity limits of human cognition, it's actually highly visual, not really conceptual. So first thing you need to do is to really understand the concept visually and use appropriate visuals to explain it. And you don't really have to explain everything about the capacity limits of human cognition here. You only need to explain a few things that pertain to two different types of feedback you're trying to explain here. And for that, I think active learning part, this is the most important part in terms of the effects of feedback. How limited capacity ties into two different types of feedback is that you don't want to overload your students by including unnecessary extraneous elements in your feedback design. So if that's what you need to focus on, what do you need to explain for second assumption? Capacity limit of human cognition. Single channel or serial processing as opposed to parallel processing. People can only think about one thing at a time. We humans cannot think about two things simultaneously. So that's what the single channel is. Limited amount, you might want to think about the capacity limits of working memory. So there are only 4 memory slots in our mind. So those slots are already overloaded with all kinds of extraneous elements like animations and decorative pictures and so on. Then feedback added to that is not going to be noticed sometimes, or not going to have strong impact. And I just talked about a couple of things here without showing anything. That's really difficult, isn't it? So you really need to show diagrams or visuals if you want to explain that. And you're talking about the process of learning, what learning involves, more precisely what active learning means. And you kind of have to tie that into feedback. Why active learning, why feedback is helpful in terms of promoting active learning, in terms of promoting all these things. And I'm thinking you're going to just talk about that. But when I first was introduced to this concept, I had a hard time visualizing or conceptualizing, selecting, organizing, and these two parts. And also meaningful learning. Well, what do you mean by that exactly? So 3 things are kind of vague. And this is also a transitional slide to move on, to transition to smartboard examples. And after this point, it has nothing to do with the slide design, but at this point, since you're switching to smartboard, you will have to change the screen resolution to fit into 4:3 aspect ratio. screen size. Then if you plan on coming back to the Google slide again and show this, then you're gonna have to change the screen resolution back to widescreen, which is 16:9 aspect ratio. I don't know if you want to bother to do that, but that's something you can also do if you know how to do it fast. It's a small thing, but the image is kind of hiding the text, so you want to move it a little down. And let's see if I can make the picture bigger, larger. Yeah, that might look better. So overall, think about the layout, timing, and use the relevant graphics to augment what you're talking about. And let me know if you have questions about my